Hey guys, welcome back to Master Game Studios. You've seen part 1. Now we're going to dive into part 2, the movement phase of how to play Warhammer 40k. Again, we're going to cover everything here from the types of movement, how to actually move, reserves, and anything else that will come up in the movement phase. So thank you members, thank you for liking and subscribing to come along this journey of how to play 10th edition, and let's dive into the movement phase. Welcome to the movement phase. So you guys have seen our command phase video. Again, if you haven't checked that out, today we are talking about how to move and everything that goes on in the movement phase. So let's start with the most important thing. How do you move your models? So how you move is you first select your unit. For us, we're looking at these Tyranid termagants today as our moving subject. Now when you move, you must measure from front of base to front of base, or back of base to back of base. The important thing here is to be consistent. We'll put our tape measure down here and we're going to the front and we'll go the movement distance, and which for termagants is 6 inches, and we'll move them to the front of the base. That way they move a consistent 6 inches. You do not want to do something where you measure from the back of the base and then you move them only to the front, because you are shortening your distance that way. And you do not want the situation where you're measuring from the front of the base and then going to the back of the base, because now you've cheated your inch a whole extra, or you cheated your move a whole extra inch there. So that is how you move your models. When moving your models, it is important to take into consideration their surroundings and what is a legal move and what is not. So for friendly models, you may move through your own models as you wish. It's just to make it easy as they're all moving back and forth in the battlefield. One key exception from this is monsters may not be allowed to move through monsters. So here we have 2 Tyranid Carnifexes. This Carnifex is not allowed to move through this Carnifex because the monsters are too big. However, this Carnifex could move through the termagants just fine because they are infantry. One more exception to the movement is when you are coming in engagement with enemy models. So this Carnifex here is not allowed to move over or through enemy models, and he may also not end his move within 1 inch of the enemy. This is called engagement range. We will talk more on this later, but it is important to note that no matter your move characteristic, you must end outside of 1 inch of enemy models. One other piece that is important to know when moving your units is called unit coherency. This is the distance each model within a unit can be from each other. So unit coherency in Warhammer 40k is 2 inches, and this is broken up into 2 parts. So if the model has 6 or fewer models in the unit, then you have a standard unit coherency of 1 model to 1 model. If you have a bigger unit like the termagants here, then you must have a coherency of 2 inches, but 2 models have to be within range of 2 models. So how that will look on the table here is we have our termagants. This is a handy tool. This measures 2 inches just for you guys at home. So 2 inches. These models are all within 2 inches of each other. They are fine. One thing we can do is move out like this. Now these models are not within 2 inches of each other here, but they're within 2 inches here and here. So 1 model within 2. And the rest of the unit, as long as they maintain coherency, then that is good. You can see right here, we have 1 termagant. He is not within coherency of 2 models. Therefore, this model cannot be placed there and will have to be scooted back in order to maintain unit coherency. If something does happen throughout the turn and you do have to break unit coherency, say these terrifying Death Guard somehow kill a couple of these and you pull out a few models like this, you've got 1 termagant all on his own. You can't move him anymore, but he has broken coherency. At the end of your turn, you must remove models from this unit until you have 1 coherent unit. So you could do this in two ways. You could pull this one model, he just dies, then you have a coherent unit. Or if you really wanted, you could pull all of these off. You have one coherent unit. Just a way to look at it if you want to play that way.
There are 4 types of movement you can choose to make in the movement phase. These are a normal move, an advance, you can remain stationary, or you can fall back. And now we're going to break these down in greater detail, starting with normal moves. So for a normal move, you are just moving the distance stated on the unit's data sheet. So for these termagants here, that is going to be 6 inches, as you can see on the screen. So every single model can move up to its full 6 inches. Again, making sure you maintain coherency as stated before. So for an advance movement, you make an advance roll, which is 1d6, and you add the result of that roll to the model's movement characteristic, and that is the full distance you get to move. So with this 6 rolled here, those termagants can now each go 12 inches. Now, important to note, if you do make an advance roll, you lose that unit's ability to shoot or make a charge later in the turn, unless you have an ability that states otherwise. You can also choose to remain stationary during the movement phase. In this case, your models make no movement at all, and in some cases this can confer benefits of some kind. Now, if your models are in engagement range of an enemy unit, you can choose to make a fallback move. And you cannot make any other types of move in this case other than remaining stationary. So for a fallback, you can move the distance on the data sheet out of engagement range. So you can see here again 6 inches on the termagants. And if you do this, you have to end outside of engagement range of all enemy units, and you can no longer shoot or charge later in the turn with this unit. Sometimes when you make a fallback move, you'll need to take a desperate escape test. So this can happen in 2 cases. One, if your models are completely surrounded by enemy units and unable to move because you can't move without overlapping their bases. You make a desperate escape test in order to gain the ability to move over their bases. Now when you make this test, you take 1d6 and for each model, and on a 1 or a 2, that model is slain. So we've lost 1 model there with that dice roll. And the remaining units get to make their full movement, and they can move wherever they want as long as they wind up outside of engagement range. The other case, as stated before with Battle Shock, is a Battle Shocked unit always has to make a desperate escape test in order to make a fallback move.
We also have to talk about moving up and over obstacles and terrain. So for the termagants here, we have seen they have a 6-inch movement, and when you're going for terrain, you have to measure the vertical up and then the horizontal distance. So for the termagants here, we'll have to measure 1 inch to go up to the wall, and then we will have to measure 2 inches to go up the wall of this rock here, and then we'll have to measure another 2 inches to go forward, and then the termagant is on the wall. And the whole unit can repeat that process for whichever ones can get up. The other ones can just sit simply below. And as long as they are within 5 inches of a vertical distance, they are still considered to be in unit coherency. Next, in the movement phase, we have to talk about units that can fly. And for our subject today, we have this bloat drone from the Death Guard. He has fly keyword. And when you have the fly keyword, you do gain a couple benefits. So of these benefits, models that can fly are allowed to move over all other models, friend or foe. So that is to symbolize them flying up and over. They don't have to worry about moving around and out of the way. You cannot end within engagement range. That is still the case. Models with fly still cannot end within that 1-inch engagement range. And you do not have to take desperate escape attempts if you are surrounded by enemy units, because you can simply fly away. Now, an important part when measuring to get up into buildings is you have to measure both the horizontal or vertical, in this case, the diagonal distance, in order to get up into the building. So as you can see here, Matt has to measure the diagonal, and his movement is 10. He can go 10 inches and land up on top of that building there. And that is how measuring and moving with flying units works.
Now we're going to move on to transports, another major component of the movement phase. So there are certain units that have the transport keyword on them. If they are a dedicated transport, you must start the game with units loaded into that transport. Each unit has a transport capacity, which is listed on the transport's data sheet, as you can see here for the Rhino. And just another thing to note, if the unit embarked in the Rhino has the Scout special rule, if all of the models in there have that rule, it gives the ability to the transport as well. You can embark onto a transport if a unit fully ends a move, either a normal move, advanced move, or fallback move, fully within 3 inches of a transport, then they can embark on that transport. You can do this with one model or multiple models up to the transport capacity of the vehicle. And then after they have embarked in the transport can continue to move as normal. And for disembarking a transport, a unit can disembark only if the whole unit can end wholly within 3 inches of the transport. If the transport has already moved this turn, then the unit cannot move or charge after hopping out, but they can shoot. If the transport has not yet moved this turn when the units disembark from it, then those units can move as they normally would be able to. So normal moves, advanced moves, they only cannot remain stationary after having hopped out of a transport. And another important note is that a unit cannot embark and disembark a transport in the same turn. However, a different unit can embark into a transport that another unit disembarked from. When a transport is destroyed with units embarked inside of it, you will roll a d6 for each model, and then that model's unit will suffer a mortal wound on each roll of a 1. So there are 5 Grey Knights embarked in this Rhino, 2 mortal wounds, so the unit takes 2 mortal wounds in total. And then the remaining models must be deployed within 3 inches of the Rhino, fully within. If every model cannot fit wholly within 3 inches of the transport, then they must make an emergency disembarkation. On an emergency disembarkation, each model takes a mortal wound on a roll of a 1 through 3. So again, they take 2 mortal wounds, so you lose 1 model, and then the remaining models can be placed wholly within 6 inches of the transport. So they can hop down on the other side of these gene stealers here. Any model that still cannot be deployed wholly within 6 inches of the transport is destroyed.
Now we're going to get into the final portion of the movement phase, and that is the reinforcement step. So there are 2 methods of reinforcements in Warhammer 40k 10th edition. The first one is Deep Strike, and the second one is Strategic Reserve. Let's first talk about Deep Strike. So how this works is it can be done by any unit who has this ability on their datasheet. For our reference here, we have a battle ongoing between the Tyranids and the Custodes. The Custode Terminators, Alar's Terminators, you can see the datasheet here, are coming into reserve. They have the Deep Strike keyword on their datasheet, which allows them to pop in. So how Deep Strike works, they pop in on the battlefield. They can be anywhere on the battlefield as long as they are 9 inches away from every enemy model that is on the battlefield. So as you can see, they are clear 9 inches away from all of them. They pop on and they are ready to arrive from reserves. They do count as have made a move. They cannot move or do any of that. They just plant their bodies in the ground there. They can still shoot, they can still charge, and if they have other things that happen later on in the turn, they can still do those, but their movement phase is complete right there. So it's important to note that in the core rules, it does state you can do this on any of your turns, turn 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, again, in the movement phase. However, I do want to point out that it is important to double check with the mission you are playing, whether you're playing maybe a crusade mission, a matched play mission, or some other open war type stuff. They might have an additional stipulation as to when you can deep strike, whether it is for competitive reasons or for narrative reasons. Just be sure you reference that, and it's not always you can do this on turn 1 or maybe a later turn in the game. So the second way reserves can come on is via Strategic Reserve. Now this is something you declare at the beginning of the battle. It works by, you can see this chart here, only 25% of your army can be put into Strategic Reserve, and any unit can be put into Strategic Reserve unless there is some rule that says they can't, but those are far and few in between. Now when you're into the battle, how strategic reserves work. We have our ongoing battle here. The Tyranids need a little bit of extra help after the Custodes got it. So how strategic reserves work, later on the battlefield, there is a chart here that we can also reference that says where these strategic reserve units can arrive. So on turn 2, they can arrive anywhere in the battlefield that is not your opponent's deployment zone edge, which is marked out by the mission you are playing. And then from turn 3 onward, they can come in anywhere on the battlefield, any table edge on the battlefield, as long as they are within 6 inches of a battlefield edge. They still follow the same rules as Deep Strike, where they must be 9 inches away from enemies at all times when they arrive. So we'll show the Tyranid warriors are coming on from reserve. We'll say this is turn 3. They have to make sure they come in. They can't go their full 6 inches because they have to stay outside of 9 inches, but they're here on the battlefield ready to fight. Again, just like Deep Striking, this unit counts as have taken a normal move, so they cannot move further beyond this reserve step. However, they can do all of the normal things they could later on in the rest of the battle. So there we go. We have covered the movement phase. It is an extensive step, but an important one that you must go through when playing 40k. Hopefully you guys followed along. If you had any questions and you need clarification, put those down in the comments below and we will hopefully be able to get to every single one of those. Again, 40k is a complex game and we're here to make this as easy as possible. Stay tuned. In our next video, we will cover the shooting phase in depth. So thank you guys for watching and we'll see you next time.